Hi biology, welcome back. So today I'm going to go over some of our lab equipment. So these are the notes you're going to want to take to do your lab equipment of what exactly is each piece, what does it do, what does it kind of look like, what is its function, and what are some common safety concerns. And I'm going to go through them one at a time. You will want to make a table in your journal that has 5 columns, one that has an equipment image. You can either do this as a sketch or there are some cut and paste images that you can use and kind of glue them in. The equipment name, what its description, so what does it kind of look like in words, what is its function, what do we use it for, and then what are some safety concerns, some of the things we have to worry about when we deal with this item. Alright, so getting started. Alright, so our first piece of equipment is the beaker. Okay, so the beaker ends up looking, it's a glass container, it kind of looks like a cup, it's got straight sides with a spout. We use this primarily to hold liquids. In biology, sometimes we'll use it to hold small items as well. One of the things we have to worry about this is they are made out of glass for the most part, which means they are breakable and you cannot tell if it's hot. So glass, when it's hot, you can't tell. So if you have anything that may be heating things up, you are not going to want to touch it with your hands if there's a possibility it's hot. If glass breaks, you don't want to be picking this up. You may cut yourself. You need to contact the teacher and have the teacher pick up the glass for you. As far as what it looks like, here's a quick kind of Google image search. Most of the ones we have look kind of like this one. And this one here, they are very, very similar. Any of these types of shapes, we all refer to all of them as beakers. Our next item is the flask. Okay, so the flask is similar to the beaker, except for instead of it being straight up and down, it actually narrows in at a point. And this is so that we can hold volatile liquids. So volatile means that the liquids give off fumes. By having it narrow down to a point, we lose less of the fumes, you don't have as much evaporate, etc. Again, it's glass, it's breakable, you can't tell if it's hot. Looking at a picture of it, these are what the flasks look like. Usually I will use these if we're dispensing liquids. We don't use them a whole lot as every group having one. However, we do use them quite often as the larger one as far as dispensing liquids for lab. Our next one is the graduated cylinder. So the graduated cylinder, both the beaker and the flask might have markings on the side, but usually they're not calibrated. The graduated cylinder is our first one that is a calibrated vessel. And it can either be glass or plastic, but it's marked with milliliters. It actually has a scale going along the side that has a value on there. For the milliliters, it may be marked every 2 milliliters, every 10 milliliters, or every tenth of a milliliter, depending on the size of the graduated cylinder. We use this to accurately measure volume. Okay, so this is how we measure how much of a liquid that we have. Again, if it's glass, it's breakable, you can't tell if it's hot. One of the other things to keep in mind with graduated cylinders is they're tall and skinny, so they are also pretty easy to break over or to knock over, which then comes back to this glass of it becomes moderately easy to break them. You do have to be careful with the graduated cylinders. Both the flask and beaker are a lot more stable. For what the graduated cylinder looks like, they look kind of like this. A lot of the ones we'll use are the plastic ones here. However, sometimes we will need the glass ones, and they look a lot more like this. Alright, for our next one, the pipette. So the pipette, a lot of you think of as a dropper. The pipette is a little bit different than a dropper because it has measurements on the side. Just like the graduated cylinder measures, the pipette measures. So the ones we use are all plastic. They are plastic droppers with measurements along the side. They actually are measurements along the little skinny part, not the ball at the end. The ball at the end is simply to help you draw the liquid up and squirt it back out. It measures and transfers small volumes of liquid. The liquids don't stay in the pipette when you move it. You do actually have to keep pressure on the bulb of the pipette. You can't just draw it in and then not just leave it and hold it and move it somewhere else. The liquids will actually either go back into the bulb or they will drain out the tip. so they don't actually stay put. So if you're moving something hazardous, you do want to keep a constant pressure, and usually we try and transfer it with something underneath of it so we aren't spilling and dripping liquids all over the place. As far as what the pipette looks, the pipettes that we'll be using this year primarily look like this one and this one here. The markings you'll notice in the drawing are only along here. You cannot measure anything with the bulb. In fact, the liquid should not go up into the bulb when you're measuring. It should only go up the stem of the pipette to the actual volume. That's it. Also, if you catch air bubbles in here, you are not measuring it correctly, because the air bubbles are volume. It's taking up volume. You got to squirt all of it out and redraw the liquid. Here's another example that we often use. Sometimes we will use these right here. These are the micro pipettes. These are for super, super, super tiny amounts, ones that we can't measure with this easily. And so we will use those occasionally. All right, our next piece of equipment is the test tube. The test tube are almost always glass. They are closed and rounded on one end and open at the other. The only way to actually close them is usually with a cork. Occasionally we will have some glass test tubes that have a screw cap, but the vast majority of them are just simply open. They do not stand up on their own. You do have to use a test tube rack to do this. They're used to hold and observe reactions or to hold and observe specimens. They again are glass. We don't have non-glass test tubes. As to what they look like, they look about like this. So we have our test tubes here. Now, the next piece we're going to talk about is the ring stand. So the ring stand is a piece of equipment that we actually will attach other things to. It's a metal rod that sticks upright with a really big heavy black base. There's a couple of them on my front table. We use them quite often, and it's used to support other lab equipment. We can put clamps on there, we can loop things over them, and it is very, very strong, and it's able to support other things. One of the things to keep in mind is the base is very, very heavy. You do not want to have that fall on you or hit your toe. It's very heavy. Alright, so for what our ring stand looks like, the ring stand looks something like this. You have, I have them up on the front desk holding the metal frog that has the sticky notes in it, and also one that holds the paper towels. They're nice and heavy, and as you can see from these pictures, you can put these clamps that can make it pretty useful for holding other things as well. Alright, the next one is our test tube holder. So our test tube holder looks like a clamp, but it's curved right at the ends, and it's always in metal, and it has a spring-loaded handle. And what the test tube holder basically does is it lets us pick up test tubes if the test tube is having a reaction, because if it's having a reaction, you don't know if it got hot or not. You cannot base only if you put it over heat that the glass of the test tube is going to be hot. Test tubes can also get hot if they have a reaction that causes heat. So we want to use these test tube holders anytime there's a reaction or if the test tube is hot. Okay, these are metal. You can't tell if it's hot, so you want to be really careful as to where you put them. If we're using these and you're using them with a hot plate, you don't ever want to put these metal test tube holders on the hot plate or near the hot plate where they might get hot, because you can't tell if the metal gets hot. Alright, our next one here, and what our test tube holder looks like is, they look like this. So again, spring-loaded piece, spot to hold the actual test tubes. Here's one actually holding the test tube. Alright, our next one is the test tube rack. Remember, the test tubes, they're round on the end, they don't stand up on their own. So the test tube rack is actually a rack of metal or plastic. Its job is simply to hold the test tubes in an upright position. There's not really any safety pieces here. You can have them out of metal, so if you don't want to put them on something hot, if they're out of metal, because you can't tell if the metal is hot. But generally there's not a lot of safety issues with the test tube rack. What the test tube rack looks like is about like this. The ones we have here at our school, most of them are the metal ones like this. We also have some of the plastic ones that look like this. That is what we have them. We will see them occasionally through the year to help us hold our test tubes. Alright, our next one here is forceps. Forceps, a lot of times I find students, they refer to them as tweezers. Forceps are a little bit different from them tweezers. Tweezers are generally even through the whole length. Forceps usually are wider and they get narrower at the tip. This makes it easier for us to hold, and especially if you have gloves on or you're dealing with something slippery. They are usually they're always out of metal in science. That lets us sterilize them a little bit easier. Same thing as tweezers, so it lets us pick up and hold small objects. One of the things to keep in mind, these are metal, they are sharp on the end. What they look like is this, and again you'll notice how they are wider and they get narrower towards the tip. This is different than like the tweezers you might see in your bathroom where they're even for the whole size. Scientific forceps, the ones we have are closer to this. They're a little bit wider and then they get very, very narrow at the tip. Our next piece of equipment is the funnel. So the funnel should be pretty familiar. It's glass or plastic. It has a wide opening at the top, and that wide opening narrows down so you can put the narrow piece down into a beaker or a flask. It also is used to hold filter paper. So if we have that wide triangular opening, we put filter paper inside. When we pour something through it, that filter paper will catch the filtrate or whatever solids are actually in there. There aren't any safety equipment issues unless of course it's glass, and then it's breakable and you can't tell if it's hot. But the ones we use are generally the plastic ones. They look something like this. So these are the glass ones. Most of the ones we have are closer to this one, which are the plastic funnels. Alright, a wash bottle. So the wash bottle is a squeezable plastic bottle with an angled tip on it. Okay, so it has this kind of like tube that comes up and out, and it squirts water, and it's supposed to dispense clean water. We don't put anything in a wash bottle except for clean water, because we don't want to end up having something that's not clean water in there and then doing a reaction and forgetting what was inside the wash bottle. Wash bottles always have clean or distilled water inside of them, and that's it. There is no safety issues here. The wash bottle is actually considered a piece of safety equipment that you always know it has the clean water in it. So if you need to rinse something off or rinse something away from you, that wash bottle will have that. As to what the wash bottle looks like, here are the wash bottles. Most of the wash bottles we have are very close to these type of ones, and this one here. Again, they're basically squeeze bottles, and you squeeze the water comes out. You always want to have the clean water inside of them. That's just a standard in science, as we do a clean water inside of them. Alright, the last piece of equipment is the Bunsen burner. So the Bunsen burner is a metal heating device that we connect to the gas source with tubing. In biology, a lot of times we'll use the hot plate, but if we need an actual flame, we need to use the Bunsen burner. The Bunsen burner is very specific to science. You don't see them really anywhere else. What we use it for is to heat chemicals in beakers and test tubes. One of the things to worry about safety-wise is it does use gas and flames. So you have to keep an eye out for burning and for the smell of gas if you don't have it turned on. If we have the Bunsen burners out, we also need to have the fire extinguishers, the fire blanket, and go over any fire safety stuff before we actually utilize that. As far as what the Bunsen burner looks like, the Bunsen burners look like these. Okay, these are the Bunsen burners. They do connect to the gas in the room. You don't need to worry about the gas in the room right now. The gas actually has to be keyed on. The default setting is turned off. Only if we actually need to have the flammable gas in the room. I actually have a key that I go and I turn in order to turn the gas on. And we only do that once we have all of the Bunsen burners and everything set up. Then we turn the gas on and we can utilize it, and then I go ahead and turn it off. It doesn't stay on all of the time. So this is our list of our lab equipment for our notes. This should be in our journal. There should be a set of pictures about like this, so if you did not want to sketch them, I do have these where you can cut and paste our lab equipment pieces, and you do want to have this chart in your journal. Alright, please contact me if you have any questions. Thank you.